What if I told you a little girl's simple question left Donald Trump speechless, and what happened next brought the entire crowd to tears? This isn't just another political moment. This is a story of faith, purpose, and an unexpected revelation that shook even the most skeptical. Stay tuned, because you won't believe Trump's response. And if you love powerful stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. A little girl asks Trump about Jesus. His response brings her to tears. The rain had just stopped falling over the small town of Clearwater, Florida, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. A large crowd gathered in the town square, eager to catch a glimpse of elected President Donald J. Trump. He had come for a rally, but the atmosphere was different tonight. Less of the usual political fervor, more of a quiet curiosity. Among the crowd was a little girl named Emma, no more than 10 years old. She clutched a small, tattered Bible in her tiny hands, its edges worn from constant use. Her mother, standing beside her, held her close. They had come, not for politics, but for something much deeper. As Trump stepped onto the stage, the energy in the air shifted. Some cheered, some watched in silence, but all eyes were on him. He adjusted his red tie, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Emma's heart pounded. She had a question no one else seemed to be asking. Would she get the chance to ask it? A few minutes into his speech, Trump paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Any questions?" he asked, a hint of exhaustion in his voice, but his expression remained steady. Emma's small hand shot up. The crowd shifted, making way for her as security hesitated before letting her step forward. She felt her mother's reassuring squeeze on her shoulder. Trump noticed her, his brow lifting slightly in curiosity. He gestured toward her with a nod. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she said softly, her voice trembling but determined. Trump smiled. "Nice to meet you, Emma. What's on your mind?" The square grew silent. Everyone expected a question about politics, about the economy, about the country's future. But Emma's words cut through the air like a knife. "Mr. Trump, do you believe in Jesus?" For a moment, Trump stood completely still. The question caught him off guard, not because he didn't have an answer, but because it wasn't what he had prepared for. It wasn't what anyone expected. The silence deepened. People glanced at one another. Some scoffed, some nodded approvingly. Trump's expression changed. Not the confident smirk he often wore, not the hardened look of a man used to fighting battles. No, his face softened. His eyes for a moment seemed far away, as if remembering something deep and personal. He leaned toward the microphone, ready to answer. But what he said next would leave the entire town in stunned silence and bring little Emma to tears. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the reporters, always ready to pounce, seemed frozen, waiting for his response. Trump looked down at Emma, then out at the people before him. His grip on the podium tightened, and for a brief moment he was no longer the politician, the businessman, or the public figure. He was simply a man who had lived, who had struggled, who had believed. "I do, sweetheart," he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "I believe in Jesus with all my heart." Emma's eyes widened, glistening with unshed tears. She clutched her Bible tighter. Trump sighed, rubbing a hand across his face, and then with a deep breath he continued. "You know, Emma, when you live a life like mine, you see a lot of things. Success, failure, love, hate, victories, betrayals. People cheer for you one day and turn on you the next. They say you're the best, then call you the worst. But through all of it, I never walked alone." The weight in his words was palpable. The crowd, once restless, now stood still, drawn in by something raw and real. "When I was younger, my mother gave me a Bible. It had a simple message: trust in the Lord with all your heart." His voice trembled slightly, just for a second, before he steadied it. "I held on to that verse through everything, through the highest moments when the world praised me, and through the lowest when people abandoned me. And believe me, Emma, there were low moments." Emma nodded, her small face filled with understanding beyond her years. "Even now?" she asked. Trump let out a breath, a small tired smile tugging at his lips. "Especially now." The audience murmured. Everyone knew he had been through storm after storm, legal battles, betrayals from those closest to him, relentless attacks from the media, and yet here he was, standing, still fighting. Emma's lip quivered, and she asked, "Does Jesus still love us when we feel alone?" The question seemed to hit him like a tidal wave. He closed his eyes for a moment, then looked straight at her. "Emma, let me tell you something," he said. "You will face days when you feel completely alone. Days when the world makes you question your faith, when people try to convince you that you're nothing, that you don't matter. But you do, because Jesus never lets go. Not when you're scared, not when you've made mistakes, not even when the whole world is against you. He's there, even when it doesn't feel like it." Emma sniffled, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "I was scared." "He forgot about me," she whispered. Trump knelt slightly, lowering himself just enough so that his gaze met hers on her level. "Sweetheart, he will never forget you." The crowd remained utterly silent, as if the entire world had stopped moving for just this moment. Even the most skeptical among them seemed moved by the sincerity in his voice. But the conversation wasn't over yet. Emma had one more question, one that would shake Trump to his core. Emma wiped her tear-streaked face with the sleeve of her dress, her small hands still trembling as she held onto her tattered Bible. The crowd remained silent, caught in the unexpected stillness of the moment. Even the cameras, always hungry for controversy, stayed locked on the elected president and the little girl who had dared to ask a question that was not about politics, but about faith. She took a deep breath, hesitating, then spoke again. "Mr. Trump?" Her voice wavered. "If Jesus never leaves us, why does life still feel so unfair?" A murmur rippled through the audience. It was a question that many had asked in the quiet corners of their hearts, but never out loud. Not in a place like this, not to a man like him. Trump's expression changed. He didn't smile, didn't deflect. For the first time in a long time, he looked vulnerable. "That's a tough one, Emma," he admitted, "and I won't stand here and pretend I have all the answers. But I can tell you what I've learned. Life isn't fair. I've seen it. I've felt it. I've had people turn on me who once called me their friend. I've been lied about, torn down, mocked, humiliated. And sometimes I asked God, why? Why me?" His voice thickened slightly, but he pushed through. "And you know what I've come to realize? Sometimes the hardest battles are given to the strongest fighters. Not because God wants us to suffer, but because He knows we can get through it. He knows we can stand when others fall." Emma's bottom lip quivered. She clutched her Bible even tighter. Trump knelt down fully now, so his eyes were level with hers. "Emma, listen to me. I don't know what's happened in your life that made you ask that question. But I do know this. Jesus sees you. He knows your pain. And just because things feel unfair doesn't mean He's abandoned you. It means He's walking with you through the storm." Emma let out a shaky breath, a single tear slipping down her cheek. For a long moment, there was no sound, no movement. Then unexpectedly, the little girl stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around him. The crowd gasped, some applauded, some simply stood in stunned silence. Trump hesitated, then gently he embraced her back. Not as a politician, not as a businessman, but as a man who understood what it meant to struggle, to ask questions, to search for something greater than himself. The cameras flashed, but for once they didn't matter. Then, as Emma pulled back, she whispered something that no one but him could hear. Something that made his eyes widen. Something that, for the first time that night, left him completely speechless. As Emma pulled back from the hug, she looked up at Trump, her big, tear-filled eyes filled with something deeper than just childhood innocence. Something knowing, something almost prophetic. Then, she whispered, just loud enough for only him to hear, "Jesus told me to tell you, He's not done with you yet." Trump's breath caught in his throat. His normally sharp, quick-witted mind went blank. He blinked at the little girl, as if trying to process what she had just said. The crowd, oblivious to the words that had just been spoken, continued watching in silence. Some whispered to each other, wondering what had just happened. But Trump felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For a man who had spent years in the public eye, accused, ridiculed, and dragged through relentless battles, those words struck deeper than any speech, any headline, any victory or defeat. They bypassed the armor he had built around himself. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to find his voice. "What did you say?" Emma smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Jesus isn't done with you yet." Trump stared at her, his mind flashing back to moments in his life when he had felt abandoned, moments when he had questioned everything. And yet, Here stood this little girl, speaking words that felt less like a simple statement and more like a message sent directly from heaven. Speaking words that felt less like a simple statement and more like a message sent directly from heaven itself. A lump formed in his throat, but he cleared it quickly. He straightened up, nodding at Emma as if she had just reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "I needed to hear that." Emma beamed, wiping away her tears. "You're welcome, Mr. Trump." The crowd, sensing something significant had passed between them, erupted into applause. But Trump wasn't thinking about the cameras, the headlines, or even the people watching. He was thinking about the whisper of a little girl who reminded him that no matter how many battles he had faced, there was still a reason to keep going. He looked out at the people before him, at the country he had once led, at the path that lay ahead, and for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. But as he turned back to Emma, he saw something that made his heart stop. Her Bible, still clutched tightly in her hands, was open, and there, highlighted in bright yellow, was a verse he knew all too well, Isaiah 41:10. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." His hands trembled slightly as he read the words. This was no coincidence. Something bigger was at work. And the night wasn't over yet. Trump couldn't tear his eyes away from the verse. The words seemed to leap off the delicate, worn pages of Emma's Bible, striking something deep within him. "Do not fear, for I am with you." He had spent years surrounded by power, by wealth, by influence. He had won battles that seemed impossible, yet he had also suffered betrayals that had cut deeper than any political attack. He had stood alone in the storm more times than he could count, and yet this little girl, this innocent child, was reminding him of a truth he had almost let slip away. Emma tilted her head, watching him carefully. "Mr. Trump, are you okay?" He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then with a small nod, he said, "I think I am, Emma." The crowd stirred, restless. They had come expecting politics, controversy, sound bites. Instead, they were witnessing something far more personal. Even the harshest critics in the audience couldn't deny that something was happening, something real. Trump turned back to the microphone, glancing at the sea of faces before him. "You know," he said, "it's easy to think that when you're at the top, you don't need faith, that you can do it all on your own. But the truth is," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "the truth is, without faith, without God, you have nothing. You're just a man trying to fight battles too big for him." A silence fell over the audience. Even those who had spent years criticizing him listened now, as if drawn in by something beyond politics or personal opinion. Trump looked down at Emma again, his expression softer than usual. "And sometimes it takes someone like you to remind an old fighter that he's not in the battle alone." Emma grinned, her dimples showing. "Jesus fights for you." Trump chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. Yeah, he does." The audience broke into applause, some even wiping away tears. For the first time in a long time, people weren't clapping for a politician or a businessman. They were clapping for a man who, despite everything, still believed. Emma flipped through the pages of her Bible again, her tiny fingers moving with purpose. "Can I read something to you?" she asked. Trump gestured toward the microphone. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She took a deep breath and read aloud. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song I praise him." Psalm 28:7. Trump closed his eyes for a brief moment. He wasn't a perfect man, far from it. But in that instant he felt something settle in his heart. Peace, strength, purpose, and a certainty that no matter what came next, no matter how many storms he would have to face, he would never walk alone. But just as he was about to thank Emma, a voice from the crowd rang out, one that would change everything. "Then why do so many people hate you?" The air grew thick with tension. Emma's eyes widened, turning back to Trump. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Trump's jaw tightened, but he didn't look angry. Instead, he looked ready to answer the hardest question of all. A hush fell over the crowd. The question lingered in the air like a shadow, heavy, unavoidable. "Then why do so many people hate you?" Trump turned toward the direction of the voice. A young man stood near the front, arms crossed, his face a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. He wasn't shouting in anger like so many had before. He genuinely wanted an answer. Emma glanced nervously at Trump, as if worried that the question had hurt him, but he simply exhaled, taking a moment before responding. "That's a fair question," Trump admitted, "one I've asked myself plenty of times." The young man didn't flinch. He was waiting. So was the entire crowd. Trump adjusted the microphone and spoke, his voice steady. "When you take a stand for something, when you refuse to back down, there will always be people who don't like it. Sometimes, people don't hate you for who you are. They hate you because you remind them of something they don't want to face. Maybe it's truth, maybe it's strength, maybe it's just the fact that you refuse to be broken." The young man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Trump continued, "Jesus was the most perfect man to ever walk the earth. He healed the sick, he fed the hungry, he preached love and forgiveness. And you know what?" He let the question hang for a moment before answering. "People still hated him." Emma nodded solemnly, gripping her Bible tighter. Trump's voice grew softer, more reflective. "I don't claim to be perfect. Far from it. I've made mistakes. I've been wrong before. But I also know that when you try to do what's right, when you try to stand firm in what you believe, the world isn't always going to cheer you on. Sometimes they'll come after you. Hard." The young man shifted on his feet. The crowd was hanging on to every word. Trump looked directly at him. "But here's the thing. Hate doesn't define a man. His response to it does." The young man's arms slowly lowered. Emma, emboldened, stepped forward and spoke in her small, confident voice. "Jesus said to love your enemies and pray for those who hurt you." Trump chuckled. "That's a hard one." He glanced at the young man again. "But she's right. Hate only wins if you let it change who you are." The young man hesitated, then gave a slow nod before stepping back into the crowd. Trump turned back to Emma. "You're a wise little girl, you know that?" Emma giggled. "It's not me, it's Jesus." The crowd erupted into applause. Even those who had come expecting controversy found themselves moved by something greater than politics, something deeper, something real. Trump turned back to the audience. "Listen, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I do know this. God's not done with me yet, and he's not done with any of you either." A standing ovation followed, but Emma wasn't clapping. She was staring at Trump as if seeing something no one else could. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "I think he's calling you to something more." Trump's heart skipped a beat. For the first time that night, he felt something he hadn't expected, a new purpose stirring inside him, and he wasn't sure what to do next. Trump stared at Emma, her words echoing in his mind. "I think he's calling you to something more." For a man who had faced countless challenges, who had stood in rooms with world leaders, who had built empires and weathered storms, those words carried more weight than any speech or headline. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The crowd watched in silent anticipation. Even the cameras, usually so focused on capturing controversy, seemed to hesitate, as if realizing that something greater than politics was unfolding. Emma didn't break her gaze. She wasn't just speaking as a child. In that moment, she was something else, a messenger. Finally, Trump exhaled and gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "You know, Emma," he said, his voice lower, thoughtful, "people have told me a lot of things over the years, some good, some bad, but no one's ever said that to me." Emma's eyes sparkled with certainty, because they weren't listening. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Trump chuckled, shaking his head. "And you think I should?" Emma didn't hesitate. "Yes." Trump's expression grew serious again. He looked out at the sea of faces before him, some supporters, some skeptics, all waiting for what he would say next. He had spent his life fighting battles in the world of business, in politics, in the media. But now, standing before this little girl, he felt the weight of a different kind of battle, a spiritual one. He took a deep breath, then turned back to the microphone. "You know, Emma, maybe you're right." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the reporters, who had come expecting just another rally, sat up straighter. Trump continued, "Maybe everything I've been through, every fight, every victory, every loss, wasn't just about me. Maybe it was leading me to something else." Emma beamed. "Jesus has a plan for you." Trump nodded slowly, feeling the truth of those words settle into his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: conviction. He looked down at Emma, then back at the crowd. Whatever happens next, I'm putting it in his hands. A moment of stunned silence followed. And then the crowd erupted. Some were cheering, some were crying, some just stood there, shaken by what they had just witnessed. Even the harshest critics in the audience couldn't deny it. Something real had happened tonight. Emma clapped excitedly. "That's all he wanted, Mr. Trump, just to know you trust him." Trump smiled, bending down to shake her tiny hand. "Well, you tell Jesus, I got the message." And as he stood back up, looking out at the crowd, he knew. This was just the beginning. What a powerful moment. Trump's response wasn't just about politics, it was about something greater. But what do you think? Was this a moment of divine calling or just an unexpected twist? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more inspiring, thought-provoking stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out. See you in the next video.